Hello, everyone. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Mitch Landrieu will be the main star of a 3-act show at the Saenger Theatre Monday morning. It's called The Inauguration. He, the council members, and some city officials will take their oaths of office. We'll look tonight at what to expect from the sequel of the Landrieu administration. We'll also discuss the mayor looking for new taxes, the World Trade Center deal stalled again, who's putting money in Louisiana Senate commercials, and our Future Watch segment examines the status of the Corps of Engineers' hurricane protection efforts. And on stage for us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, reporter, The Lens; Don Ostrom, our Future Watch reporter; and Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate. Well, Errol, first over to you, and we have an inauguration coming up the beginning of next week, and you wanted to sort of talk about inaugurations over the years.
Yeah, true New Orleans style, we tend to be a little bit more showboaty with our inaugurations. I mean, some cities, like their new mayor comes in at midnight on New Year's Eve, and it's like New York City, and no one knows about it. We traditionally had it in May, and there's always been a tradition of wearing the white linen suits. And Gallier Hall has been the traditional site of most of the inaugurations. This will be an exception, and I think the Saenger is a great symbolic place because it's certainly a sign of the revival. But it reminds me of 12 years ago, the inauguration of Ray Nagin was at the arena. The arena within was a fairly new building, and people were excited about Ray Nagin. I mean, Nagin represented a new direction for the city. The city had just been awarded an NBA franchise fairly recently, and just hope seemed so high that day. And people were just so excited about Nagin. Of course, we know how that all worked out, and then what would happen over the next few years. But when Mitch Landrieu was inaugurated 4 years ago, the poor guy, the day he was elected mayor was the day before the Super Bowl the Saints won. So by that Sunday, nobody was paying attention to the fact that he'd been elected mayor. When he was inaugurated, it was right after BP. BP had happened, I think, a matter of days before, and the big attention that day was to trying to find a way to stop the leak. I mean, he was being inaugurated on the day when there was this unchecked oil flow in the Gulf of Mexico, and people were wondering if they'd ever find a way to do it. And so there was a certain amount of tension to the day. But I just wanted to acknowledge, and I know Stephanie's going to talk a little bit more about it, but leaving the scene is Jackie Clarkson, who's been a part of political life in New Orleans for a long time, off and on as a council member at large and as a district council member and as a state representative. She did not need to run this extra time. She was term limited as an at-large member. She was prevailed upon to run for a district seat. She said, I took it for the team, and I think she personally regrets having run for that seat. We also Cynthia Hedge Morrell and Kristen Palmer will also be leaving the scene politically.
And so inauguration is this Monday, right?
Right.
And it's going to be at the Saenger. So why the Saenger? Why was that site chosen? I can remember inaugurations of the past in front of City Hall, like you said, in Mays, it being very, very warm, everybody in their white linen, but this go around.
Yeah, I think the Saenger is a great symbolic spot. It's going to be Saturday morning. People can sit there. They're going to be comfortable. And it certainly speaks of what's happened in the last 4 years in New Orleans, because the Saenger got pretty much ruined by Katrina. And it took a long time coming back, and now it's back, and it's a beautiful building. So I think it's a good idea. They have to do it in the morning because by their regulations that the council needs to be sworn in and needs to go and organize itself by noon that day. And so they have to hurry this through in the morning. And so usually they have a mass at the cathedral, and then they have their swearing-ins. The mayor will be sworn in, and the council members, and then a couple of public officials, Marlon Guzman and
the new coroner.
Yeah, and the new coroner, and then the council goes to City Hall, starts its business, and I guess everybody else goes to Galatoire's. Well, I don't know if they're going to Galatoire's, but everybody else is.
Goes to lunch.
Yeah.
And so after that inauguration day, then the business really, really does begin.
Here we go again.
Absolutely. All right, thanks a lot, Errol. Stephanie, I'm going to go over to you right now, and let's talk a little bit more about this inauguration. And Errol just kind of touched on it with the fact that the Saenger is the spot where this inauguration is happening. It's really symbolic for where we've come.
And the mayor has such a strong sense of symbolism. I mean, he's going to be talking about it as as kind of a stand-in for so much of what's happened the last 4 years. And I have to say he's right. I went back and I looked at his inaugural speech from 4 years ago. It was such a different mood. You kind of forget, I think. BP was certainly hanging over it. There was this real sense of, here we go again. You know, we had just gone through the, people were relieved to be through the Nagin administration, I think. It's interesting that the mayor thanked Mr. and Mrs. Nagin for being there for the city in a time of crisis in his speech. I think he might phrase it differently now.
But he barely thanked them. He says, we want to acknowledge Ray Nagin. That was
right.
It
was gracious, though. It was acknowledging their sacrifice,
right.
And maybe they sacrificed a little less than we thought, I guess. But the BP thing was really hanging over it, and also the fact that the Nagin recovery, the fact that city finances were in such bad shape. Remember, City Hall was down to 4 days a week by then. And this kind of
when we were waiting still to see the cranes in the sky.
Exactly, which are everywhere now.
Right, they're all over the place.
And you can't get anywhere because there are so many cranes in the sky.
It certainly feels like a different city,
right?
It
does, and it feels normal. I have to say, it's, you know, we have all these problems. Certainly revenue is a huge part of it, and you're going to be talking about that. Crime continues to be a problem, all sorts of things, but they feel like they're within the realm of normal, of what a city goes through and what other cities are going through. Whereas 4 years ago, we were still kind of mired in this disaster mode and entering a new disaster. And so I think you have to say it feels pretty good to be around New Orleans despite everything right now.
A crisis, not just with the mayor, but with the mayor's administration. Remember those confrontations between Stacey Head and
right.
Veronica White and those sort of things.
Right.
You don't have that now.
You don't.
And people speak well right. of the administration.
They do. Although obviously a big part of the campaign was people who maybe didn't get along so well with him. I think it's going to be interesting to watch the mayor and the council going forward, because this is a council that is going to be probably more independent than in the past. You mentioned Jackie Clarkson. The mayor recruited her to run because he wanted an ally, and she lost. So Jason Williams, the new at-large member, he didn't support. The mayor didn't support him. The mayor didn't support Nadine Ramsey, who's coming in District C. He didn't support Stacey Head, who won anyway, the incumbent. So you have the two leaders of the council, neither of whom had the mayor's support. So I think that's going to be very interesting.
So recovery, I mean, the recovery is, we're really in the groove for recovery right now. I mean, that's something that the mayor wants to say, we're on a roll, so let's keep it up. So you think that's really kind of going to be the theme of speeches this Monday?
I think it is. That's the looking back, that's the we've done really well to this point. And then the looking forward, I think, will be very much about revenue.
Right, and as you just pointed out, it is a different council now that's coming in with 3 new members who could be very, much more independent than before.
Right, not obvious factions at this point, so that'll be interesting too.
And the second term, especially for a term-limited executive, can be different because now he has the luxury, if he chooses, to be less political. Now he can talk about taxes because he's not going to be running for mayor.
Unless he might be running for something else.
That's what I say. Big asterisk right there.
If he chooses that a second term can be different, it could give you, especially early in the second term, like the first year or so, if you can get the taxes passed and if you can get them, start solving problems, and then, by the time the next election comes around, people may have forgotten about it,
So as Errol mentioned, by law, council has to meet right after the inauguration. So what is this council going to be tackling? And I mean, what are they facing now?
Right. Well, the first thing they have to do is choose leadership. So it'll be interesting to see who gets budget, who gets special projects, utilities, the big assignments. But the council, one of the main powers that the council has is overseeing the budget. So they're going to be very involved in these discussions on revenue. They're if the legislature passes some tax measures, the council decides whether the city goes forward. They also are very involved in planning, zoning, approval of projects. So there are a lot of projects out there that are happening. Some are stalled. We got word this week that maybe the State Rock Market might be, hitting some roadblocks, some other projects. So those are really the two kind of areas that where the council has a lot of power.
And it is going to be a challenging time for this council.
It is, I think so.
And
finding money, again, that's the heart of what they do, is finding money to fund the city. So.
But that's always, if we would have had this discussion 20 years ago, we'd say, well, there's going to be budget problems and there's bill tightening. That's always there.
But we have these consent decrees now. It seems like a lot of bills are coming due. Some we've talked about a lot, like the consent decrees. Some we really haven't talked about much at all, like the libraries are in real trouble. The health clinics, the city health clinics that were so well received, well regarded after Katrina, those are in real trouble now. There's a lot going on.
I had one person who's kind of close to city government point out that for all the recovery we've gone through, that's really wonderful, but the people of New Orleans haven't paid for anything yet.
Yeah.
No.
All right. I mean, it's all been federal funds and the funding that we've gotten and
Right.
grants and everything. And at some point, the people of New Orleans are going to be called upon to pay something.
And then
I mean,
hanging
to
over
pay
all
something
this,
new.
I think, is the Audubon millage election. That was the sense that maybe people are very skeptical about what they want to pay for. The Audubon millage went down by a very large margin, and anyone proposing a tax is paying a lot of attention to that.
You know, people made it loud and clear that they weren't that very interested in that tax. However,
So-
there is a tax package moving through the
Right.
legislature right now. Tyler, I want to go to Tyler to talk about that the mayor is supporting, saying we need this money to take care of these issues that are facing us.
Right, there are actually 4 different tax plans that the mayor is advancing before the legislature. One is a property tax increase on fire and police, and that would go for fire and police. That is the one that has the best chance of passing, and that it's a little complicated. It would actually have to be approved by the voters statewide as an amendment to the state's constitution, and in that statewide election in November, it would also have to be approved in Orleans Parish. Then the city council would have to call an election, a separate election for Orleans Parish. That would have to be approved. But the current version of the plan would raise the fire and police millage from about 5 up to 10.
What would that do
Mills.
to the average tax bill?
That would be about $100 for a $200,000 home, and would raise something like $25 million for the city. The city, Andy Copland told me the other day, the city thinks it's facing about $40 million in revenue needs from 3 different things. One is it owes money. The city owes money to the fire pension fund. It also owes money for the consent decree for the parish prison for all the abuses that have happened there and need to be improved, and also the consent decree involving the police department. Again, more millions, all adding up to maybe $40 million a year.
So once again, the mayor is saying we need this extra revenue. If we don't get this extra revenue, we're going to see services cut, furloughs over at City Hall, days of operations cut.
He testified that the current structure is not sustainable. I mean, very strong words.
Yeah, so one plan it would be the people in the state and in the city would vote for an increase in the fire and police millage. The second one is a 1.75 percentage point increase in the hotel tax. The tourism industry is opposed to that tax. They say New Orleans would end up with a combined hotel-motel tax that would be too high. That bill was heard in a House committee, barely passed. The tourism industry is opposed, as I mentioned. The lieutenant governor, who oversees tourism in the state, is also opposed.
And is running for governor.
But
And
from a
that-
voter's perspective, that's always the most popular tax
Tax of
because
visitors.
it's a tax on somebody else.
On somebody
And every
else.
city does that. Every city. I mean, you travel someone and look at your bill and look at the tax. Everybody jacks up the tax because you got voter support
But it
on
also
that.
would be on the heels of that assessment for hotel motels, which is a voluntary thing that came last year.
So
So
that was that actually took place this year.
Right.
And so again, this hotel tax the legislature would have to authorize the city to put it on the ballot. So ultimately, if it gets through the legislature, the people of New Orleans would vote whether to increase that tax.
because it
There's
is
a-
just within Orleans Parish
just
for
Orleans
hotel
Parish.
motel.
Then there's
And
a
then
third
the tobacco
plan.
tax.
Yeah, that would increase the tax on cigarettes by 75 cents per pack, or maybe 80 cents per pack. And that was defeated in a House committee, but will be brought back next week. That would raise perhaps $25 million a year. Again, this is not actually imposing the tax. It would authorize New Orleans to call a tax, so the people of New Orleans would vote whether to impose this tax. And I use the word impose because no local government at this point has its own tax on cigarettes. The statewide tax is 36 cents, one of the third lowest in the country.
So
And
that's still alive in the legislature. And then the last thing, quickly, if you could tell us about the proposed special taxing district.
Yeah, the mayor, this plan is still not fully clear. The mayor wants to create a special taxing district on the riverfront that centers on the World Trade Center. he hasn't revealed his hand exactly what he's trying to do there.
But essentially, it would be that all revenues would be kept by the city and not shared by the state, from sales tax and hotel motel tax there.
Exactly, and that's another revenue source he is hoping to capture for the city to deal with these budget problems.
But we don't know the details of that one yet.
He has not shared them yet.
Okay, Tyler, thanks a lot. Dawn, Future Watch, hurricane protection. We get, the weather's been absolutely gorgeous, but around the corner is June 1st, which makes us all worry.
Well, we talked a little earlier about how the city just kind of feels normal again, and I think you have to say part of that normalcy is a feeling of security. The Army Corps of Engineers put in temporary or interim pump stations and canal closures right after Katrina. We have, according to them, been covered for a 100-year event completely since 2011, although the permanent structures aren't finished. Those permanent structures, if you go out along the London Avenue Canal, the 17th Street Canal, you will see the work going on, and it's incredible to see what they're doing. But the permanent pump stations they're putting in, both at London and Orleans and 17th Street, those pumps, when combined, would fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool in less than 4 seconds.
Wow.
They'd fill the Superdome in less than 90 minutes. So the pumping capacity is incredible. The systems that are there now, the temporary ones, would fill an Olympic pool in 5.5 seconds. So the temporary fix is working, but the permanent structures will be complete. They're scheduled to be complete in 2017. They may even be complete before that in 2016. They're all part of an almost $15 billion package that's called the Hurricane and Tropical Storm Damage Risk Reduction System. Nobody wants to say that, but we'll just talk about that package for now. Two significant parts of it: the Gulf Intercoastal Waterway West Closure Complex, which is the first line of defense for storm surge into both the Harvey Canal and the Algiers canals.
And those are gates.
That's the nation's largest sector gate was put up there. The world's largest drainage pump is there. That has been turned over to the state. That project, the Army Corps says it's a notice of construction complete on both that project and the Inner Harbor Navigational Canal surge barrier. That's the big wall at Lake Bourne. Those two big projects are done and have been handed over. So the difference this hurricane season is the state is in charge of operations and maintenance. The Army Corps of Engineers says, if the plan, and there is a whole plan in place, the Army Corps and the state and the locals will all be there together in the event of a storm. We're not going to be deserted, but there's been an official handover. The other things will be handed over in the coming years. But the capacity really just has increased tremendously. The Army Corps will tell you this is the first time there has been a system. Before Hurricane Katrina, there was hodgepodge and piecemeal. The area had never received more than a couple $2 million to do one pump or one gate or one. This is the first time really any area has received lump sum, get it all done, system built, and it's working. And experts from our area traveled to the Netherlands after Hurricane Katrina. Now people from the Netherlands are traveling here to see our systems.
So bottom line, are we more protected?
We are definitely more protected.
At what level would you say? Category 1, 2?
They don't talk about the levels. They talk about that 100-year storm, the kind of storm that brings the flooding and brings the storm surge and occurs once in every 100 years.
If you want to visualize how much we're protected, if anybody remembers the old Bucktown where Sid Moore's was,
the land is.
go walk by there now, and it's like Hoover Dam in that side, okay? And
go walk around any of those construction sites and see how much the land alone has been raised, and to see the gates in action and the pumps in action. And in all the pumping stations, there are safe houses built and being built that. And there are also remote operations. Everything can be run remotely from a safe area. If everybody had to evacuate, they can gauge the water in the canals, they can turn everything on. It's a much different situation than we were in 2005.
Yeah, it's nice to know it's there, but we really don't want to see it tested.
Hopefully we don't need it.
And we're not entirely safe.
Yeah, and even that is they're very quick to point out, it's called a damage risk reduction system. Right. It doesn't mean a storm's not going to hit and hurt and your roof's not going to get blown off.
Yeah, but it is pretty an amazing thing what they have done in a fairly short amount of time.
And some of the largest design build projects ever
that
considered.
Surge barrier is really a civil engineering feat. Okay, over to Stephanie. Senate commercials. Some interesting ones. Who's doing them? Who's paying for them?
Well, it's interesting. A new study came out this week by Wesleyan University in Connecticut that looked at who's buying the ads in Louisiana. We're 6 months out from the big Senate election. So far, we've already seen $3.2 million worth of ads. Very few of them from the candidates. That's the interesting thing. 85% of the ads have been by outside groups, these super PACs that you've been hearing about, the big money outside groups. Almost half the ads have been by a group called Americans for Prosperity, that's the Koch brothers you've been hearing about, the industrialists who are putting a lot of money into trying to get this, flip the Senate Republican. One of their chief targets, of course, is Mary Landrieu. So those ads attacking Mary Landrieu, they're basically from this group. Second is a Democratic PAC attacking Bill Cassidy, her lead opponent. It's called the Senate Majority Fund, so that has a number of big Democratic donors. Landrieu comes in third. She spent $350,000 so far. And Bill Cassidy hasn't had to spend a dime on TV because he's got Americans for Prosperity doing the work for him. He will eventually. But there's a really interesting new ad from Landrieu that stars somebody that a lot of us in politics know. Viewers might not know, but they'll get to know him. His name's Boise Bollinger. Donald Boise Bollinger, he's a big Republican in the state, a big fundraiser. He owns Bollinger Shipyards. A lot of jobs.
Very close to George W.
Very
Bush.
close to George W. Bush, is supporting David Vitter for governor, wants to donate a lot to his super PAC. But he's doing an ad for Mary Landrieu. And it's a really good ad. It's a very effective ad. It's hitting all of her points, which are that she sends a lot of jobs. He has a shipyard. He's got a lot of contracts, and she's helped. So they go back a long way. But she's provided jobs. She's the new energy chair. She supports oil and gas. And while he disagrees with her on some issues, he's supporting her. And that's her message. I mean, this is a Republican state, and she needs Republican votes.
And so how do the Republicans take this?
It's pretty controversial, as you might imagine, because the Republican strategy is to make this a party line vote. Of course, this isn't necessarily a vote Landrieu versus Cassidy. It's who should control the Senate, and should the Senate be aligned with President Obama. That's their argument. So they're not so happy.
For people who aren't familiar with the Koch brothers, tell them a little bit more about what they've been doing nationally.
They've been they've spent a whole lot more even in North Carolina. They're targeting these Senate seats. They have a real anti-regulatory agenda, very much against the Affordable Care Act. A lot of the ads have been about Affordable Care Act. They were against some of the changes to the flood insurance program that Louisiana politicians supported. So that's something that Cassidy has been hit with a little bit. But they're real libertarians. They're really anti-big government.
And aren't they accused of being polluters who don't want the government?
Exactly. They have a lot of. Their interests are their internet sites devoted to their interests. They're very widespread, but the anti-regulatory environment. It involves healthcare, obviously, but it also involves a lot of environmental issues.
So basically, it has begun.
It has begun.
Yeah.
It's not stopping till November, maybe
right.
December, if we have a runoff.
Okay, Stephanie, thanks. Tyler, over to you. And you mentioned World Trade Center and how that riverfront taxing district would be hinged on the World Trade Center, but things aren't really going so well with the redevelopment of the World Trade Center.
Right. The building's been vacant now for a few years, and over the years, there's been all various attempts to redevelop it, and looked finally like it was going to be put back into commerce. The plan, the city chose a company called Gatehouse out of Dallas, and their plan was to build a 245-room hotel by the W chain, and then that would be topped by 280 luxury apartments that could have ultimately become condos. And so it looked like the plan was going to happen. Cedric Grant, the deputy mayor, said that he thought the negotiations would be complete at the end of 2013, and that by now that the renovation of the World Trade Center, which is one of the prime properties in New Orleans, right there on the riverfront, would be underway. And but I got the city to release a letter on Wednesday saying that they had terminated the negotiations with the Gatehouse. And in a story I wrote for The Lens, I spoke to the head guy in Dallas, and he was very unhappy and really thought that it was just couldn't understand what had happened, that the deal was going forward, and then he feels like, I think that the city did not deal with him in good faith.
So he was surprised by it?
He was just shocked.
What reason is the city giving for saying, okay, deal's off?
The city's explanation is that Gatehouse would not offer enough money. Gatehouse's explanation back is that, in fact, they significantly increased their offer but that the city barely even wanted to negotiate with them, which then leads to questions, since this is New Orleans, as to what's really going on.
Well, and this is the third attempt in the last decade or decade and a half where negotiations have fallen through and the city said it wasn't enough money.
So
is the city just being too greedy on this deal, do you think?
Well, we don't know exactly what's going on, but one of the bidders earlier that was not selected, although that was a surprise, was called the Tricentennial Consortium. They wanted to actually take down the World Trade Center, turn it into a park. These are very prominent tourism leaders, and also include Ron Foreman, who's got the aquarium right next door. And the suspicion, who knows at this point publicly, but the suspicion is that this is an opportunity for them to come in and that the taxing district that I had written about, that the mayor wants to have the legislature authorize, it centers on the World Trade Center. So there's probably some sort of link, the suspicion is, between the creation of this tax district that the mayor wants and also terminating negotiations with Gatehouse.
Well, if there's a park there, there will be no tax revenue.
Right. There will be no sales tax revenue or hotel motel revenue.
That was the Tricentennial's original plan, but they could certainly come back, since the feeling was really to keep it there. And Tricentennial did not have a way to pay for their plan. So the city has said they're going to rebid this in 60 days. But one of the questions is, if Gatehouse, which is a reputable company with a very well-known hotel chain W, if they end up feeling like the rug was pulled out from under them, what other big name is going to want to come into New Orleans? I mean, maybe we'll be proven wrong, but that's this feeling right now, is that.
Okay. Well, we have to wrap up this discussion right now and look to our looking ahead segment. Errol.
We know there's been a lot of tension lately between the Churchill Downs, which owns the fairgrounds, and the fairgrounds. But tomorrow there will be as one, because tomorrow is the Kentucky Derby, and Rosie Napravnik, who lives in New Orleans, who won the Louisiana Derby, who was the leading jockey at the fairgrounds this past season, will be riding. She'll be riding a horse called Vickers in Trouble. If she wins, she'll be the first woman ever to win the Kentucky Derby. So there's going to be a lot of excitement. Also, Calvin Burrell from Lafayette will be racing. If you're at the Jazz Fest around 5:23, go around the paddock area, and they usually have it on TV.
They have it, I think, on all the screens usually.
Tyler.
Various tax plans. Again, the mayor is trying to get through with the legislature. Keep an eye on them: a cigarette tax, the hotel motel tax, a special taxing district, and also the police fire millage.
All righty. Dawn.
Together with Home Care Solutions and the Poydras Home, they're doing a 6-part series at Poydras Home, helping people with elder care options. The next in the series is this Thursday, and it's all about intergenerational activities with the elderly, trying to get families to be able to play with elderly who are dealing with Alzheimer's.
Thanks a lot. Steph?
Up in the 5th Congressional District, they're about to have their second open election in 2 years. Congressman Vance McAllister is not running again. Everyone's waiting to see if Neil Reiser, the state senator who he beat in a runoff, is going to run again. And after that, the pieces will fall into place.
All right. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Thanks to all of you guys for being here. And thank you all for watching us. And we hope to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Good evening.